Good morning, and thank you very much for joining us today for a conversation jointly hosted by the United Nations Global Compact and Edelman. My name is Antoine Calandrier, and I run the reputation practice of Edelman in North Asia. My job today is to facilitate a panel discussion between leading voices really in the field of sustainability to help us better understand what concrete steps can organizations take to ensure that the Sustainable Development Goals are better met in Asia Pacific. Over the next hour, we will discuss how we can raise our ambition and scale up action in the field of sustainability. We're going to delve into some of the findings of the Global Compact 2020 Progress Report and the newly released APAC cut of their CEO study on sustainability. We will also explore what the business community must do to ensure that the Sustainable Development Goals are better met in Asia Pacific. So for this discussion, I'm joined today by an esteemed panel who will help us navigate these issues. May I introduce Sue Allchurch, Chief of Outreach Engagement at the UN Global Compact, who joins us from New York. Thank you, Sue, for joining. Sue has been instrumental in developing the UN Global Compact participant engagement model and building initiatives that help businesses to further their sustainability impact. All this informed by her long career leading change at Unilever. We are also honored to have Professor Christine Lowe joining us from Los Angeles, California. Thank you, Christine. Christine is Chief Development Strategist at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology and a visiting professor at the Anderson School of Management at UCLA. Christine has led a charge around sustainability from every side of the table as a policymaker, an advocate and board member of multiple NGOs, a lawyer by training, and a commodities trader by profession. Christine Lowe served as Undersecretary for the Environment in the Hong Kong SAR government and as a member of the Hong Kong Legislative Council. She will guide us through the latest government actions, creating opportunities for business, especially around China's path to achieving carbon neutrality by 2060. And joining us from Singapore is Matt Eccles, the Vice President of Public Affairs, Communications and Sustainability at Coca-Cola Asia Pacific. Welcome, Matt. Thank you for joining us. Matt also serves as the General Manager of the company's flagship World Without Waste initiative for the region. World Without Waste is at the intersection of core business operations and sustainability, focused on beverage packaging recovery, recycling, and reuse. We will explore with him how this program has developed and what businesses can learn from this initiative. And lastly, we're delighted to be joined by Esther Ann, the Chief Sustainability Officer of CDL Development Limited and the UN Global Compact 2018 SDG pioneer for green infrastructure and a low carbon economy. Welcome, Esther. We're glad to have you on this panel as well. Esther is a forerunner in sustainability and a co-member of the Global Compact Network Singapore Management Committee. She also sits on the Global Reporting Initiative Board, the Corporate Advisory Board of the World Green Building Council, and the UN Environment Program Finance Initiative Property Work Group, as well as the Asia Pacific Real Estate Association Singapore Board. Esther will share her journey in sustainability integration and help us navigate some of the challenges and opportunities by setting ambitious goals to accelerate climate action and SDGs in the built environment. Thank you very much for joining us today. Going to the next slide. So before we dive into this discussion, I'd like to invite our audience members to submit questions through the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We have set aside 15 to 20 minutes for questions at the end and look forward to a lively and informative discussion. I'm personally looking forward to exploring how expectations for businesses and their leaders are evolving and how businesses in the region can keep a step ahead in the area of sustainability. The reality, in my view, is this: businesses don't have a choice anymore, especially as we recover from the pandemic and forge a path to economic recovery. At Edelman, we've been tracking trust in societal institutions for 2 decades through the Edelman Trust Barometer. And over those 20 years of studying how trust is earned, we have learned that the 2 essential elements of trust are competence and ethical conduct. These qualities have always been critical to any trusting relationship. But what we're seeing today, though, is that companies specifically are expected to solve, not just sell. By 3 to 1, ethics mattered more to consumer. Only 24% of the total trust score is informed by competence. The other 76% is explained by dimensions related to the company ethics, integrity, purpose, and dependability. Here in Asia Pacific, 73% of the people agree that the company can actually take actions that both increase profits and improve conditions in the communities where it operates. And change needs to start from our leaders. If we go to next slide, expectations are not only increasing amongst consumers, employees want to hear from their leaders and hear them speak out and take the lead on societal issues, including issues like inequality and climate change. And lastly, this is just to confirm something that we all know. Our most recent study of 600 institutional investors confirms that on and on, investors apply a premium valuation to companies that are successfully navigating environment, social impact, and governance initiatives. So how are we, and how are our leaders actually responding to these issues? With that, I'd like to turn to Sue first to get your views on how are businesses and CEO operating under the external pressure? Are we moving quickly enough?
Thanks, Antoine. So we'll be able to engage in a Q&A and conversation a little bit later. So what I'm going to do now is just give you the data from 2 studies that we have. It's the CEO study, which is a deep dive into talking to a lot of leading CEOs about their thoughts about what they're coping with now and how they see the future and with respect to how sustainability will drive their business. And then also we have a deep dive into our broader progress report, which is reaches out to working level sustainability individuals in the corporate sector to tell us what they're thinking about the space. I'm going to do those pieces of data now, and then we can get into a little bit of conversation later. So the first point here is to show you can see CEOs are very committed. And there's a couple of data points here that are very important. The first one is that as much as 72% of CEOs in the APAC region agree that sustainability is what will drive trust. And linked to that, 87% agree that that trust will be critical to their business competitiveness in the next 5 years. And this is an interesting statistic because it's actually 72% globally. So we know that in the Asia Pacific area, business leaders are ahead of the world in terms of thinking how impactful this will be. And 72% of them agree that the business is critical to driving the delivery of the Sustainable Development Goals. That is the same around the world. So there is a real commitment from CEOs. And you can see the report, you'll understand a lot more about what it is that they're doing to drive impact and what they're feeling are. So now I come to the broader pictures of businesses around the world and in the APAC region. This is the summary of everything that I'm going to show you going forward. So all the data comes back to these 4 main points. The first point here is there is very high levels of commitment and action and engagement from the corporate sector. Lots and lots of activity, investors as well. Now, there are 3 areas that we need to go faster on and that we need to see more progress on. And the first of those is we do need to track more and measure more the outcomes of actually what's happening. And I'll show you that a little bit more detail later. Secondly, we need to see more integration. There's definitely some goal setting and some actions happening at sort of operational level, but how do we integrate that right across supply chains? That is the biggest challenge, and that's the thing that we need to work to help step up on. And then the last point is that the goals aren't necessarily ambitious enough. So whilst there is a lot of activity, if you add it all up, it isn't necessarily going to add up to what we need to do to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals. And I'll bring that alive throughout the data here going forward. So the first slide here talks about the core values and the core principles of responsible business. Companies in the Global Compact adhere to these 10 principles which cover human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption. Now, what you see is that at a top policy setting level, again, really high levels of engagement. 96% of companies have policies and practices across all of these principles. And this number is higher for Asia Pacific than for anywhere else. So very, very high level of engagement. And 90% of businesses here say that it is through the principles that they are going to drive the Sustainable Development Goals. That is great news. And that shows that there's a desire to look across all areas, not just picking a few SDGs, but really across it. It's fantastic. And as you can see here, the levels are very, very high across health and safety, gender, child labor. In fact, the child labor numbers here are bigger in Asia than the rest of the world, non-discrimination and equal opportunity, all the things that we know are driving ethics and trust in business. So very, very high engagement. The next slide here just shows the areas that we need to work a little bit more on. And they reiterate the summary. First of all, measuring impact. You can see these levels, it's under 20%. Are we actually measuring the impact of what we're doing? On environment, the 17% environment, the reason I've highlighted that in red is because that is a very significant difference between Asia and the rest of the world. That number in the rest of the world is 65%. So it's the one area globally we're seeing a lot of tracking. But we need to, we can do more and help businesses in Asia a little bit more. Second point, as I mentioned before, is integrating. So Simi, if you can, yeah, integration across supply chains. When you look at how many of them are actually looking to get supply chains to adhere to the principles, only 17%. And then you look at how we got subcontracting arrangements and agreements, it's about 30%, more in the labor area. But still, that's where we could see a little bit more progress. And then the last point, as I mentioned before, ambition levels. Here's a couple of data points to illustrate what I meant by ambition. We know that 95% of companies are setting standards for labor. We saw that in the earlier data. But this data point back here just shows that only 45%, if you go back to the slides, Simia, only 45% here, labor policies to ensure, actually turn into assurance that they're going to affect your standard of living. So even if we have these policies, only less than half of companies are really making sure that those policies translate into a decent standard of living. So in the end of the day, how high is up? It needs to be higher. It's tough to do. We've got 10 years to get it there. So that's the sort of thing we're looking for in terms of ambition. Now, the next set of slides talk about the Sustainable Development Goals. So I think, Simi, I can bring that. These are the Sustainable Development Goals. And again, very high levels of engagement. 87% of businesses who we talk to in Asia Pacific are taking action. That's higher than 84% for the rest of the world. So again, we're seeing a lot of engagement and a lot of action. Now what you can see, the next slide here shows where the activity is at highest in Asia Pacific: health and well-being, decent work, industry and infrastructure, climate action, of course, and responsible consumption. Most of these are about 60% levels, above 60%, so a lot of engagement in this area, which is really great. And just so that you know, there's only one difference here versus the rest of the world. In the rest of the world, the top 5 includes gender and doesn't include industry and innovation and infrastructure. I'd love to know the facts, but I imagine that there's better progress in gender in Asia than there is in the rest of the world. That's just my hunch, so that might be why. Okay, so very good engagement. Now again, a couple of slides to show where could we see more progress. So again, you'll see the same thing, measuring our impact. We are, about 50% of us are starting to track positive action against the goals, but not on the negative. And this is obviously important because actually where we're having a negative impact, which is often the case in climate, we need to be tracking that to see how we can make more progress. The second point here talks about, again, integration across the supply chain. 40% are tracking their progress at a company operations level, but less so through suppliers and less so through actual product use. So, you know, what are consumers actually doing with our products? What impacts that having? So again, the integration story is coming up again. The next point shows again, how is the strategy of the Sustainable Development Goals being integrated in? Well, you know, 50% are designing business models that will affect the SDGs. We could do with seeing more with that. But again, the issue that I mentioned before is ambition. We have the same sort of level of ambition that we need to see more. If you see this number here, 39% of organizations and businesses are setting goals that are truly aligned to what we need to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals. That's the main thing. It's like climate. We know that we have to align our plans to a warming scenario of 1.5 degrees. So if we're not trying to get to that, it's not necessarily high enough. We know this is hard. We've got 10 years to get there, but what we've got to do is try and get our goals to align to what the society environmental needs are. So I think there's a couple more slides, Samia. The next slide shows what are the challenges that we hear from businesses. Again, the progress report can go into a lot of detail, but there are two big messages. For big companies, it's integrating across the supply chain. All the businesses that we work with, it's about how do I get my labor standards right, living wage, this is the biggest challenge. For smaller businesses, it's financial resources for the learning, for the skills, for the guidance, etc. And that's what Global Compact is here to do, to help with. So a couple of other points just to make clear for you. The next slide, please. In the report, we have a deep dive into different sections, into these different sectors. So you can start to see how different sectors are tackling it. And I won't go into the detail, just one point to be made, which I put at the front. In every single one, only about 50% of the businesses believe that their sector has really started to tackle it. So there's interesting work to be done in the next 10 years about that. And I think that just brings me to the final slide again. Which is a summary. We have great engagement, but then we have 3 areas that we need to focus on. We need to help businesses with tracking and measurement and the setting of the goals. We need to help businesses with integration across their organizations, their suppliers, and also their subsidiaries in some cases. And we really need to help businesses understand how high is a goal that we really need the world to be working towards, and how to set that and how to track against it. So that's a bit of data. I hope it helps everyone understand how the Asian companies are doing, and in many ways leading the world.
Thank you very much, Sue. Interesting data indeed. And with that, I'd like to turn to Christine for a moment, really, to kind of unpack that a little bit. And what's your take on what you're seeing currently in the field of sustainability? And is there anything that Sue has presented that resonates with you in your work today?
I find it very interesting that the sustainability awareness, as Sue just presented, in Asia Pacific is now very high. And I think this is different from what it was a decade ago. However, getting on the track, to really do better, to really integrate, that is actually quite difficult. But what is happening, I think, today is companies at the senior level are asking questions like, well, how do I do it? The point I really want to make going forward is just since September, we've had a number of countries actually making new policies that I think will push this process. So China was the first one that came out on the 22nd of September to say China will meet carbon neutrality by 2060. And then Japan and South Korea came out and they both committed to carbon neutrality by 2050. Now, what that means is for at least Northeast Asia, we're having governments, and these 3 governments are competent. They are actually quite highly skilled, although their political systems are very different. I think for them to say, we want to reach carbon neutrality, what this essentially means is an industrial, technological, and management and administration revolution. In China, they have already required, starting this year, listed companies have to report on environmental reporting. So, you know, there has actually been a string of questions over the last year or so from Chinese companies saying, oh, and how do we do that? So the ESG trend, although Chinese companies are focusing much more on environment and actually governance, you know, that's already on track. So I think we need to spend more time going forward on what the social indicators are. But, you know, that is a difficult area, even for the more advanced economy in Europe. You know, exactly how do you do that? But the good news is you now have the EU, you have China, you have Japan and Korea. You know, these are big economies that they are on track for carbon neutrality. And as I said earlier on, this really represents a revolution, and it will touch on not just listed companies, it will touch on all the other companies that listed companies are doing business with, because they're going to ask their supply chains up and down to provide much more information so that people can assess the risk. So, you know, if there's any chairman or board out there in the Asia Pacific area, albeit they now know there is something called the UN Sustainable Development Goals, yet actually for them to really take it on board, I think there's nothing like government policy and a lot of push also from investors in the coming years.
Thank you very much, Christine. So a revolution is on the way, and with that, I would turn to Esther and to understand from your perspective in your company. You've done a lot of things on sustainability, right? So how do you address those issues, and how do you see the opportunity?
Okay, well, greeting from Singapore, and thank you for having me. And well, I think what we were fortunate is we started a so-called ESG or sustainability journey as far back as 1995, when global warming was not quite the agenda. And we established the ethos of conserving as we construct. Basically, is addressing the issues, the challenges that the building environment was facing at that time. And we feel that as companies growing in the global presence, we need to align with the global best practices. That's how we started in 25 years ago. And of course, the barriers was like, the level of awareness was not quite there. And then, of course, the will of, and political leadership or business leaders were not, quite, aligned with what we are today. But fast track to today is a very different, scenario. And there's definitely convergence of, business will, political will, and definitely the action has to step up a lot more. If I could use the business case to elaborate to what Sue and Christine has mentioned, basically, we have the 4 pillars that actually anchor where our ESG strategy and initiatives anchor a point. One is integration. The second one is innovation and adaptation. The third one is actually investment. And the last one is impact. So integration, ESG cannot work if it is working in silos. So you need the whole organization, from the board to the management to the working level to even your whole supply chain, to work together. And you have to integrate it into your whole business strategy. It cannot be sustainability department is in silo doing their own thing. And we are very fortunate that we have very strong leadership commitment. And my portfolio only report to the board sustainability committee with direct advisory and support from the board, and also the group CEO on the operation level. So integration is very important. And innovation, just now we talked about one of the findings is innovation technology is very high, in the findings, which is very true. In order to move the needle towards, a low carbon economy and, green infrastructure, you need technology, you need innovation, you need solutions. And all this linked to investment, because without funding, without, resources, you can't, apply all these technologies and solutions and best practices to move the needle and to speed up the impact. And last but not least, you need to measure what get measured, get managed, and also identify gaps to move forward the so-called the ambitious target. you can set target, but if you don't track, you don't know the gaps, then how are you going to improve? So tracking, reporting, and disclosures are very, very important. In our area, which is a building and construction industry, we have high environmental impact. That is actually a big challenge, accounting for 39% of greenhouse gas emission globally. But it is also an enabler that we can make a difference. And not just the developer, but also the whole value chain, you know, to the architect, to the engineer, to the main contractor, subcontractor, and even the supplier, which have very high impact on the embodied carbon. And so what we need to do as a developer is, you know, drive everybody along, move everybody along to set ambitious targets. And like what we did in 2018, we are the first developers in Singapore to set SBTI, ambitious targets, and that will engage the whole value chain, not just our internal stakeholder, but also our supply chain. And I can elaborate a little bit more later on. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Esther. I think we'd love to hear about some of the examples that you know, of the work that you've done, and some, you know, concrete tools that that the audience member can, you know, use and take away. But that's a really good lay of the land. So with that, I think I'd like to turn to Matt. And Matt, you're leading the World Without Waste initiative for APAC. And obviously there's ambitious targets on the back of that to reduce plastic waste. What have you learned from running this program that would be worth sharing with the group here?
Yeah, thank you, Antoine. Thank you for having me. And thanks for sharing the research. Very compelling, and also super helpful to see the cut specifically on the Asia Pacific region. Let me take a step back, and then I'll come to our World Without Waste initiative. At Coca-Cola, we've worked hard to align our sustainability priorities around the SDG goals, but we also focus on where our company and our business system has the most impact on the environment. So our priorities are in the area of water. We set a goal to be water neutral by the year 2020. I'm happy to say we've achieved that. And in many parts of the world now, we're starting to be water accretive. We also have a lot of goals around climate, but more specifically, we're focused on our share of the carbon reduction needed to achieve the Paris Agreement. We're focused on sustainable agriculture and have a lot of key metrics and partners in that area. And of course, packaging. And these are sort of the areas where we believe our company touches the environment in the most meaningful ways. Packaging, collection, recovery, reuse is a big challenge for us, like all consumer products companies. In the packaging space, around our World Without Waste initiative, we have 3 specific goals. The first one is to make sure that 100% of all the packaging we put into the marketplace is recyclable. Those are, in our view, that's sort of table stakes. The second piece of the goal is around collection, which is a bit more ambitious. We have set a goal to collect the equivalent of every package we put into the marketplace by the year 2030 globally. And the third piece of the World Without Waste initiative is really around reuse, and we've set the goal to use to make all of our packaging include at least 50% recycled material by the year 2030. The second 2 pieces of this goal are quite ambitious for us. Today, we are refilling, recycling, and collecting around 60% of the bottles and cans that globally that we put into the marketplace. That's a 2019 number. Again, our goal in that space is to get to 100% by the year 2030. So we have some work to do there. We did see specific movement from 18 to 19, some encouraging numbers. We increased the rate of collection and recycling in this space by 4 points from 2018 to 2019. In the Asia Pacific region specifically, we saw a very attractive double-digit increase in collection, a 16-point increase from 18 to 19. Again, we have a lot of work to do on collection, particularly in Asia, where there isn't, in some countries in Southeast Asia and Southwest Asia, there's not a lot of recycling collection infrastructure, and there's not a lot of effective working markets for the circular economy. So this is a place we're spending a lot of time. But we do have some great examples in the region that we're working to learn even more from and scale. And as you might imagine, we do a lot of work with partners who have a lot of local expertise. We're particularly proud of a partnership in India with UNDP. We call it Project Prithvi. And it's a collection project across India, working with local communities. Since 2018, in partnership with UNDP, we've collected over 45 million metric tons of material through that project alone. And we're learning from it every day and trying to learn what can be scaled in other markets. We have other examples of local partnerships that are working in the Philippines, where we've invested in a facility that will turn bottles into bottles with the goal of sourcing all that material from the Philippines and not shipping it from other places. And then on our recycled material goal, there are some places in the world where we're making incredible progress. We have in 18 markets and counting, we have some markets where we have 100% of our portfolio made from recycled material. 2 countries in Europe, most recently we're proud of the Netherlands and Norway. We have launched brands in Asia, particularly in Japan and in Australia, where those brands are made from 100% of recycled material. Again, this is a space we're learning. We're trying to work with our supply chain and integrate those learnings every day. But there's a lot of pockets of great progress that we're excited to be able to scale as we go forward.
Thank you, Matt. And with that, great examples, by the way. With that, I'd like to turn back to Esther for a second. So in your field, in terms of the programs that you are running, is there any particular example that you would like to kind of present or talk to us about, so that we can also learn from that part of this from your industry, which is the building industry, really, or real estate?
Yeah, certainly. I think the level of awareness is the biggest challenge here. Especially we have interfaced with a very big value chain, you know, the supplier, the contractor. When you talk to them about SBTi, about embodied carbon, most of them will look at you blank. It's like, what exactly, you know, is that? So what we feel is like, it is very important to engage and empower and educate, you know, to bring, build a much bigger ecosystems to share this common goals together. And just now I was actually looking at Zeus, you know, the finding, and I find that goal number 17 was missing, you know, which is the collaboration and partnership, which I feel is a little bit, you know, this is a big potential that we could, you know, ride on that. And that was also the reason why in 2017 June, we opened the Singapore Sustainability Academy. Basically, we use our, you know, as a developer, we build it as a net zero building. Okay, and only powered by solar panels, and we brought together 15 industry partners and also 6 government agencies who are behind it. So we really bring this like a 3 public, private, and people sectors partnerships together. And of course, UNGC is our, you know, one of our a great supporter, and including also we have like World Green Building Council, UNDP, and all are our partners. So bring together, provide clarity of the so-called 17 goals, 169 targets. It's very mind-boggling. Not everyone is so into, you know, SDG and all that, especially, you know, a few years back. And today there are more people know about the term SDG. But if you ask them, what exactly does it mean to you? Which one are you embracing into your business that you can actually make a difference and also contribute? So this is what we do when we build this Sustainability Academy. And in the first 13 months of operation, we actually engaged, we held 400 events over 13 months. And with the focus on sustainable energy and clean energy, because we actually provide half of the space rent-free to a regional partner called Sustainable Energy Association. And through their partnership with ADB, they reach out to, you know, capacity building for sustainable energy professional, not just for Singapore, but for the whole region. And no one entity can, you know, change the world alone. And so that's why we believe in partnership. Singapore is very small, but we can work as a hub to bring a bigger, economy together. And don't forget that our ASEAN neighbor is actually, it's like now, I believe it's the 4th largest economic bloc, and with huge population and resources. There are a lot of partnership opportunity, and if we can embrace SDG to help all this emerging economy, we can move the needle much faster. So I feel that partnership is one big thing, but we also have to empower them with the knowledge and how they could really embrace it into their businesses, whether they are large cap or they are SME, because a lot of our value chain, in fact, they are SME. So how do we raise the level of awareness and turn them into action? That is where we can really, propel the, all these global goal, whether it is a 1.5 degree business ambition or, all this, selective ambition within the 17 goals. So we were very happy that we actually joined UNGC 14 years ago as signatory, but today we are the participant level already. And we have been actively engaging and making good use of the whole treasure trove of guidebooks. And just now you mentioned too, Anton, go to the, some of the businesses here may wish to visit the academy, the UN Global Compact Sustainability Academy. There are a lot of useful information. When we first started reporting SDG in 2016, we were really like, oh, where should we start? How should we start? And I find those guidebooks really, really useful. That was co-published by UNGC, GRI, and World Business Council for Sustainable Development. Because we are not just reporting SDG, we have started our reporting journey as far back as 2008. So how can we bring SDG, in 2016 into our integrated reporting approach that combined with GRI and integrated reporting approach, making good business sense of ESG, and also, bring in the CDP, SBTI, and also the latest SB real estate, standards. So how do we bring all this together and the synergy together? Not the more the merrier, but what you can really, create positive impact. So the big thing.
That's Esther, a question that I would like to just build on this for a second, because this is an important point that I'd like Sue's view. So thank you for bringing this up, because I think the question of the tools and, how do you take concrete action and what is available out there for my business to kind of, go and move forward in that field. So would you have any advice perhaps to give to the group here on how to take the concrete step that Esther was just talking about?
Yeah, as Esther said, there's a plethora of resources and information. And I always say to companies who are joining up, just get on the phone to me and we'll help you navigate the system, because it's so complicated.
People will do that.
That is actually one of the main things. Someone in my team can help, and we can help. We can help guide, etc. But I think what we going back to the numbers that I showed you before, what we see most difficult is for companies to say, so how do I start? What do I do? How high is up? I'm interested. How do I get going? What's the first step? And we've got there's so many things, but there are a couple of things that's really come to mind. We've established a set of benchmarks, which we introduced back in June, went through a consultation process, and then reiterated that out in September. And these many organizations find very helpful. There are just a set of real absolutes in any of these targets or benchmarks. You know that if you're going to try and deliver one of these, even if it takes 10 years, it will contribute to us solving the goals. So obviously the first one is gender balance. It should be 50% across all management levels. That's the number. It can take 10 years. You can get there. I saw Unilever do it in about 4 to get to the numbers that it's got now. It's doable. But just set that goal and go for it. Another one would be zero waste to landfill incineration. Simple, no more complicated. Doing it's not simple, but that's the goal. 100% of people across the supply chain to have a living wage relative to that in that nation. That's it, doable. Now, underneath each of these, if you think about, those are the benchmarks and the goals that I'm going to set. Underneath, how do I do it? We have a reference sheet for each sector to help underneath each of these benchmarks. What does it take to do it? And then, of course, we have a lot of leading organizations, just like Esther, just like Coca-Cola, which can give you the best practice. So how do we help you get those? Well, we have the academy. Organizations, participants have free access to the academy. All their members in their organization can join. But also, we've just launched these impact initiatives, and they are like an accelerator program. There's 4 of them at the moment. One is about integrating the SDGs. What are the goals I need to set? And you start with a self-evaluation. You do that online. We have evaluation techniques so you can really understand where you are today. Companies then work together to set the goals. Then we understand, we're helping with integration. We have SAP helping us with that. And of course, that's their job, corporate integration of systems. And then tracking and measurement. That same routine goes throughout the year. You start together, go through a program. We have coaches and resources and professors, etc., to help. We also do that on innovation, which is the Young SDG Innovation Program. We do that on gender, and we're doing that on climate. And the big thing about climate is what we're really doing is working with governments to raise ambitions so that governments and businesses together in the nation are getting there. They're the most, I would say, high touch, hold your hand, really help and teach and engage companies throughout the journey. But on top of that,
I also hear that you are inviting people to get in touch, right? To
yes.
To reach out, to really understand how to take that
line. We can help.
And so building on that, thank you very much, Sue. Building on this, back to Christine for a second before we turn to questions. So obviously you mentioned earlier that policy is obviously a great way to kind of invite businesses to kind of, move forward faster. What are some of the initiatives that you are seeing that work best in terms of perhaps collaborations between the public and private sector, or any advice you may have to can continue propel that with governments?
Well, you're going to see governments perhaps even passing laws on climate change. So, for example, the UK already has one, and I won't be surprised if China is going to pass a climate change law. Different jurisdictions will have their, whatever is their political constitutional construct to do this sort of thing. So, there could be an overall framework, and then underneath that, there would be many plans and targets. So I think maybe I can just follow up from what Esther and Sue said. There are so many companies today that I know of who are saying, okay, I want to get on the trajectory. So, I mean, apart from going to Sue, there are plenty today of commercial consultants and NGOs out there who are very happy to help people to look at perhaps the most fundamental things about their company is, do you know what, on the environment, because you can measure that, do you know what is your environmental footprint? Do you know how much energy you're using and everything about it so that you can manage it? It's easier to say, well, would you like to have a target to have a more diverse board? That I think for many companies is, what does it really mean? And I think a lot of Asian companies are not ready for complete parity. But in any case, I think on the environmental bit, everything is measurable. So therefore, this is where they must start. And because in China, there is a requirement for the listed companies, there's nothing like, to drive this. And also stock exchanges. For example, in Hong Kong, a few years ago, they started to ask listed companies to get into ESG. And it's gone from voluntary now to mandatory. So, you can have a journey of a number of years to bring people along. I think now we're really back to what Sue said earlier on. People kind of know about the SDG, the climate goals, and so on, but really it's for their companies to first be willing to look inwards and to have the data and to be willing to take the next step, which is, what do I do with the data? And be convinced that actually there'll be a better managed companies if they knew have that kind of information in front of them.
Thank you very much, Christine. And with that, it seems that, there is an understanding and awareness of what needs to be done, and taking that next step internally when you are actually in the business might sometimes be more challenging. And I just would like perhaps to, as we open the Q&A section now, to turn to Matt with one of the questions that we have here in the Q&A, which I find interesting because it's kind of encapsulate what we're talking about here. And Melissa here says, it's encouraging that countries and CEOs set visionary policies. What kind of guidance, information, and support is provided to turn these policies into really operational goals, tactical goals that directors, managers, and employees on the ground can take action on? And so in short, how do we translate these big ideas into smaller achievable steps? Matt, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I think it all starts with a point Esther made earlier around integration. So you can't have, it doesn't work to have your sustainability agenda sort of sitting off to the side from the core business operations. The sustainability agenda has to be fully integrated into your core business operations to achieve the goals. And I like to talk about it in a way that resonates with particularly with business leaders, which is if it's not part of the core operations of the business, then by definition, it's not sustainable. If it's a set of activities that are sitting off to the side of the business, then that's sort of a set of activities in effect that's being subsidized. But when it becomes part of the core business operations, then it becomes sustainable from an environmental standpoint, and it becomes sustainable from a business standpoint. And so what we do is, and look, it's not easy, but what we do is we work. Our CEO has very high expectations that our global leaders have our sustainability agenda fully integrated into their business operations, and that there are very clear metrics around every one of our public pledges. And we have, in most cases, external partners and auditors to audit those metrics. And then we report that out every year, of course, to our board, the investor community, and the stakeholders. And we no longer have an annual report and a sustainability report. They're combined into one. So we have one report, and it's the report of the business finances and the impact that we're having on the environment, released every year. And so that's where everybody's held accountable. So as you hold that expectation, as you hold your regional leaders to that expectation, and you build that into their success metrics and the way they're paid, then it quickly gets translated into local activations. And look, there's not a one size fits all. I was reading some of the questions, in across the Asian markets, they're quite different, right? I mean, in some of the, like I said earlier, in the South Asian countries, in the Southwest Asian countries, Southeastern Asian countries, we need to build recycling infrastructure to collect and recycle. And then we need to have more local end markets to create that circular economy instead of collecting the material and shipping it all over the world, right? And so we're focused with local partners with expertise on building that recycling infrastructure. And in some places, in other places, we're focused on getting that material back into the supply chain, into brands, and creating some compelling, we're a consumer marketer, so we want to create some compelling consumer excitement for buying brands and products that are more sustainable. And there's a lot of research and sort of facts around this, and candidly, they're not great. I mean, we know that through the research you've presented, that this work builds trust, and that trust translates into brands and consumers who trust brands or don't trust brands. Mm-hmm. What we don't see everywhere in the world is consumers willing to pay more for that. So we're not yet seeing consumers eager to pay more for a package, for example, that is more environmentally friendly. And so I think it's on some of the marketers to educate consumers and to create those markets where we can create more. And again, that's how the circular economy comes together, creating the demand and then all the way through the supply chain.
Thanks, Matt. And that's a good segue to one of the questions that we have also here from Faith, who is asking Esther, how do you persuade the industry stakeholders to get involved in your initiative that are working towards more sustainable projects and solutions? Since most of Singapore stakeholders, especially contractors, subcontractors, are motivated by monetary or profit incentives. How do you do that?
Mm-hmm. Can I just also chime in what Christine was just saying, that we need to really know what are the issues, and there are a few things that we have done which has proven to be very, very useful as a guidance, as a compass to guide us, which is the materiality study. Because as a business, we thought these are the issues that are important to us. But do you know what our stakeholders think? So the materiality issue, we started every year in 2014, sorry. It has really helped us to look at, hey, what are really the top ESG issues that our investors, our customers, tenants are telling us. And then we can align better. And especially now with investor, consumer activism, definitely we need to know more what they think, whether we are aligned. So materiality study is very, very important. And then there are also the other two study that we have done that it is really useful, and also in a way help us to convince our board for support. That is our climate change scenario planning, because we need to know what are the so-called climate threats and what are the likely cost to us, if both in terms of both physical risk and also transition risk, because globally there's carbon tax. There are also more stringent green building regulations. And so what are the likely costs for us in terms of transition risk? Mm-hmm. And also the latest one that we completed one is actually the supply chain risk segmentation. Okay, we need to look at what are the environmental risks, and also what are the social risks, So we look at all these, and then once we have a very clear idea of those self-assessment, what are the gaps, what are the material issues, and what are the likely opportunity. So if we need to turn, something very, for example, something a bit more abstract, like, oh, I set goals. You don't just stop at like, oh, I want to ensure fair and safe, inclusive workplace. So how? So if you go to our website, you can see that we have a quarterly sustainability report. We have a few operational, KPI, for example, 0 fatality, 0 occupational disease, 0 accident, and 0 corruption and fraud. So all these are aligned with the 10 principles as well as, relevant SDG for us. So with all those more operational and concrete KPI, it's easier to make sense of like, oh, okay, this is one of our goals, in our sustainability blueprint, and to be achieved by 2030. And you don't only report by 2030, you tell people whether you achieve it. You have to track it and also share it, regularly. So what we do is not just a annual report, but also a quarterly report, which is posted online. So with this, actually, it's a very important communication and narrative to convince our, the large ecosystem of stakeholder, whether it is our investor, whether it is our consumers, tenants, or even recruits and the media, with more awareness of what we are doing, what we are really doing good and doing well at the same time, you will get the support. And today, the business case of embracing ESG is much, much stronger. But it will actually help you access to funds through, sustainable finance, and the fast-growing ESG investment. You can witness this year, a lot of investors, the largest global investor, already say that ESG will be a major, consideration when they make investment decision. So you don't want to lose out in this, especially for listed company. So I hope we also answer these questions that, Faith was asking. How do you convince? And now it's not the time to convince already. Now it's the time you step up to do it. When you deliver results, your top management, your board will give you the support.
May I offer maybe a simpler way, because I've actually discussed with many directors of companies on this, especially when they're starting. If you want to show them the sustainability goals and talk about risk, you know, that's something that they understand. It's a sort of hard business questions. So, you know, is for example, Black Lives Matters, is that affecting your business? The answer from some of them in the supply chain is yes, that is affecting them. If you're saying, are your investors asking you for your environmental data? And if you haven't got them, what does that really mean? And why are your investors asking you this now? So I think a simpler way is just to look at the SDG goals, or maybe a segment of them, which, you know, a company feels that they understand, and then talk in the language of risk and how they can de-risk.
Thank you. That's a concrete advice. Sue.
Yeah, just very, very quickly, we could happily give the information on the business case. It is just overwhelming right now. And Esther will be very humble, but I've known Esther for a while and I've listened to her present, and she is the best investment asset that organization has got, because she understands that the work she wants to do costs money, and where's that going to come from? SDG bonds, blue bonds, green, I mean, they are booming. So there's no limit to the amount of information there is to say that this is worthwhile doing. Maybe not going to work on day one, but over time, it's absolutely fundamental to the future of the business. I mean, and I usually often use Esther as an example of how a business has driven investment and attracted money because it's been driving a green agenda.
Right. Thank you very much, Sue. We have a lot of questions in the Q&A room, but I think unfortunately we are almost at time, and I just wanted to hear each of you with really your final thoughts. If I had one takeaway as a participant to this webinar, I'd just like to to take back to my company or to reflect on, what would that be? And I would ask you to make it very short, please, so that we can do that within the next 2 minutes. So starting with Matt, perhaps, any closing thoughts here for the group?
Sure. Thank you again for inviting me to participate. I think, for us, we have a clear set of sort of public goals, again, around climate, water, sustainable agriculture, and packaging. We want to move faster. We know that we have to move faster against these goals. For us, any one Coca-Cola package that ends up in the ocean or someplace where it shouldn't be is unacceptable. And so we have to move faster in this regard. And so we're trying to learn as much as we can. We're trying lots of things with lots of different partners, learning, and therefore trying to scale those learnings so we can move quicker. And so I think it's through engagements like this and through other engagements with other stakeholders that challenge us to think about things in different ways, it helps us move faster and get to these goals quicker. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Matt. One word from Esther, just to close this, your thoughts here. What is it that we get from you?
Action is important. I want to just one more sentence. I think ASEAN really provide a very great growth potential with, the rapid urbanization, and with 60%, more than 60% are young people below 35 years old. With investor pushing it, there is a lot of potential, to embrace SDG and embrace climate action, because the future belongs to them.
Thank you very much. Turning to Christine real quick. Thank you.
Introduce the idea of non-market risk, because to a company, they're used to market risk, which they think they can control. But actually, there are a lot of other risks out there, of which, the UN sustainability goals, environmental goals, climate goals, infectious diseases, and so on, are things they don't always think about. But at this time of COVID, I think it has brought about a consciousness that there could be risk out there that affect your business entirely. So I think to be more conscious about what those are and be prepared, the UN Sustainable Development Goals is a pretty good framework for companies to remind themselves.
Thank you, Christine. And Sue, any final words?
You know, my word is ambition. I'd love to work with everyone to raise our ambition so that we do deliver these goals. And it's the most purposeful work to be able to do, to build your business and to contribute to the goals. So I'd love to work together on raising ambitions.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you to all of you for this informative conversation, insightful, thought-provoking. Thank you for the audience also to join, and we look forward to seeing you again around the panel, hopefully soon. Thank you. Have a good day ahead.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Angela.
Thank you.